All right, everyone. Do a little Smiles Rants video. It'll be number 6. This is going to be on the Clerics of age 97, or at least the revised changes of 97. What I think about each race for Clerics and to expect. So I suppose we can start off looking at Cleric. Cleric, very standard, 30% military casualties, immunity to plague, and the support caster. Starts with Divine Shield, Greater Protection, Illuminate Shadows, and Wrathful Smite. These are all your standard and traditional support casting spells. And then, of course, all your basic spells are all included in the list. And they get an Economy Science bonus production books. And they start with a few extra wizards, which is nothing to sneeze at early age when everyone's got 10 wizards. You get 20 times the wizards, you can, if your mystic power isn't that high out of protection, your clerics are actually pretty decent casters. And then let's look at that support list. We have this age, all your normal spells, but we've removed Hero's Inspiration as a support spell. Now, no race actually has Hero's Inspiration, as far as I'm aware. I can just double check that. It's only on War Hero. So you don't actually need to take it out of the support list if no one has it. In the first race age, that actually happened, that Hero's Inspiration was in the support list and had been for a long time. It's just that no races had it. So the first time a race had it, it was back in the support list. Anyways. But we have new spells. We have Aggression, which gives your soldiers extra offense. This is available to Orc only. Got Mist, and I don't think that's a super strong spell. We've got Mist, available to Dwarf only. That's 10% minus combat losses. Pretty strong bonus. In terms of the amount of land that's giving you in a single spell, pretty high. 5% defense from Greater Protection's like 3% fake land. Salvation's like 3% free hospital. Mist is like 6% free guard state. So it's pretty strong. Salvation, which is available only to humans, that's your minus 10% troop losses, not combat losses. Not a super strong effect, but if you've got the mana, like you're out of war and you're making casual hits, there's no reason not to have it all the time. You're going to throw it on people you think are going to get hit in the same way that you'd cast Wrathful Smite, sort of, just intuitively and naturally. Same with Greater Protection. But it's a bit more active. Toss it on people as they're about to hit. Mostly just a big mana sink, which is fine, but be prepared for people to want it every single attack and run out of mana. And then Town Watch. This is available to Halfling only. And I think that's your biggest bonus of any support spell. It can easily save you 10,000 troops in a chain circumstance. Very useful for TMs that are getting chained, very useful for High Peasant Corps getting chained. Just throw it on after a couple hits. Just be wary, don't want to cast it too early. Don't want to cast it because you're hit one time. Especially don't want to cast it if you're going to be raised or massacred. That just will murder your economy. You don't want it out of war ever. So, actually, I have all this in a little list here. I've been making sort of a Cleric master sheet. But these are how I rate sort of the support spells. Illuminate Shadows, strong. It's the least likely to be Mystic Vortexed off, especially a non-cleric before a Night Strike run. And it really does help. And I rate it stronger than Divine Shield because you only really eat 10 or 15 fireballs and you're done. But when you're getting Night Striked, you're often eating 50 Night Strikes, 100 Night Strikes. And at that point, you're costing the enemy rogues upwards of 20 ops, that's the best you've ever had. So, and And on top of that, when they're trying to get through your watchtowers at the very beginning, Illuminate Shadows will slow them down a lot. So it's especially good for TMs that have watchtowers. GP, just because it adds defense to TMs, it lasts a very long time, so it doesn't use up a lot of your mana. It's useful for all 25 of your provinces, but especially useful to people with the most defense, and it's really nice. And then Town Watch, as I was saying, going to be super strong for pop losses, and sometimes if you're getting like Mystic or Chained and they had decent peasants, that's going to a lot for the overpop. It's generally when a TM's getting chained, they max peasants. Generally when a core is being chained, they're not at max peasants, so it can matter for TM. Those are my S tier ops. For support casting, I think you're really good ops. Wrathful Smite, something you're throwing on essentially every chain happens or before it happens. Fanaticism, I think you can throw on pretty much every attacker, every hit. You don't always need to if you don't need it, but it's free offense on the people with the most offense. What's not to love? Mist, I think similar to Town Watch, but not quite as strong. Just throw it on every chain. It's going to do really good work. And you don't need to cast it on it. Just cast on the people getting chained, and it does good work. Salvation, thinking of making this one just sort of good. But I think just the fact that it's always good, always saving you 10% losses, you can use it whenever you want, especially out of war for random hits and stuff. It's not going to be super useful when you're getting chained. I think it's more of like... It's sort of like you cast it on someone and they lose 1,800 guys instead of 2,000. That's sort of like you just traded 2 mana for 200 troops. That's like trading like a guaranteed Night Strike at 200 kills or something. So that's why I kept it that. And then Divine Shield. This would probably be higher rated if the Exposed Thieves change wasn't going through. But with Exposed Thieves being a duration spell, that's mostly what I use DS for. The only other uses of DS are really Anti-Amnesia, Anti-Nightmares, and Anti-Fireball. And like I said about Fireball, you're only eating like 10 or 15 Fireballs, so you're only really kind of stopping 2 or 3 operations there for spells. And then when it comes to Nightmare and Amnesia, I think it's really likely that you're getting Mystic Vortex first. So it's a lot less likely to be beneficial there, because it's just probably not going to be there. You know, sometimes you manage to keep it up for a Nightmare run. But again, if they're casting 50 Nightmares, they're probably Mystic Vortexing you first. Probably during as well, because they know you're recasting it. And I don't see as many people Mystic Vortexing random core to get rid of IX. So that's why it's a lot higher. And then Nature's Blessing. Sometimes you just need to be able to cure a plague. So that's why it's a bit better. And then the rest of your spells, you know, sometimes you're just trying to save a TM mana, or someone that happens to be out of mana, pop up that spell. But it's not really anything special happening. So those are your spells. And so avians, dwarves, humans, and halflings are all going to be slightly more beneficial to run as clerics, whether or not you think they're your best cleric or not. In other ways, to be determined. So mine's 30% military casualties, worth like 10% hospitals, mid-age, worth more than that early age when you don't have very good building efficiency. So generally speaking, I think your cleric's not quite as hard-hitting a core as your other core. I don't think you're going to be wanting to run a full core of clerics this age. Some age it works out. This age, I think you're looking primarily at just having that like 3 to 4 support casters. Immunity to plague. It's to be determined how many undead we actually see. And that's mostly just a defense bonus while being chained. Otherwise, plague is just, it's a minor mana tax on things, but it's not a huge deal otherwise. So mostly you're looking at that support casting utility, and as long as you have enough clerics to cover that, good to go. More spells this age, so I could see you wanting maybe one extra cleric over most ages if you're taking advantage of those new spells. Now, the difference between economy science versus military science for core means that you're gonna... Sometimes you'll still have the same military numbers, but it's gonna be on an inflated net worth, because you've got higher population, more income. So you might actually have the same offense and defense, but you're getting that from having more troops. So it's a bit of a net worth bloat. And it makes it so they're a little bit worse at chaining people, but usually better at being tanky. Especially with higher building efficiency, you can usually get away with better watchtowers and stuff like that. So let's go through the races and what racial clerics you want. So first off is Avian. I think most people would consider Avian Cleric sort of the quintessential cleric. The general thought process being that Avians attack the most, and so they're incurring offensive losses the most. And if you're attacking a lot, your offense bleeds, you don't have any offense left, it doesn't really matter if you're attacking. So having that built-in sustainability is really nice. And I understand the idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with that thought. I don't think it's the most important thing in the world, however. Another reason people like the Avian Cleric is that Avians are already sitting with the most build space of any race, more or less, as they don't need racks, or they at least have built-in barracks. They don't need or can't use stables. You're looking at about 25% free build space for an Avian already. Then you add in sort of 10 free hospitals. So they're sort of like a super dwarf in terms of build space. So when you run an Avian Cleric, you can run like 20 guard stations, 20 watchtowers, and 20 TGs. That's pretty good. If you're a cleric and you're running, good build efficiency, that makes those buildings a lot stronger. And when Avian doesn't have to run stables like the other races, stables are that one sort of attacker building everyone has that doesn't get affected by building efficiency. So the better building efficiency you have, the better it is when you don't run stables. It's a minor thing, but I always like a way to get building efficiency on top of Avian. Where with the new books going into economy science for Cleric, that helps it a lot as well. And then the Avian, it gets Fanaticism, which is going to be a really nice Cleric spell. I use it quite a bit this age, tossing it on my war heroes all the time to make hits. At the very worst, if you're just making individual hits, in a way, Fanaticism can act like a 5% minus troop loss, send 5% less troops. So Fanat on its own is already like half as good as Salvation. Oh right, aggression's on the Avian now. Is it also on the Orc? No, they did lose it. Okay, so I did make a mistake there. Let's fix that. So Avian's the only race that's getting 2 support spells. I don't think support aggression is coming in too clutch. It gets used like a couple times in age effectively, but it doesn't really. I don't think you're generally running Avians too tanky, even with Cleric. By tanky, I mean higher D specs. But you do have the extra build space on Avian, so you can actually slip in like 10 forts into your build and run 1 or 2 extra D-specs, and you become really hard to chain. You've got a lot of minus losses, you've got a lot more defense. You can even slip in both guard stations and forts, whereas a lot of the time, if I want a tankier core, I'll run higher D-specs and forts, but I'll more or less cut the guard stations to make room for it. So I think, and the Avian's got a really strong elite. So you can run a less elites than some people. Like, maybe a lot of people, they want to run like 12 EPA. Maybe your Avian can run 10 EPA because it's got more training ground. And then you fit that extra stuff into defense. And then often, if you're running like tacticians as your main core, and then you have a few clerics, that's when you see a lot of Avian clerics as well, because they sync their armies together. That's one of the issues with clerics sometimes, is that if you're running tacticians, then you're not syncing your. It's a big pain for leadership. Is there anything else there? I think if you're running a lot of Avian clerics, like if you're running a full core of them, running it a bit more standard, every one of your people are going to be running pretty high offense with not a lot of defense. I think if you're running just a couple of these Avian clerics, you can run that tankier style better. So all around, Avian gets a, let's call it a B+ for cleric. That's good. Probably should just be it. Dark Elf cleric. The spell rune cost, I don't think that's especially handy for cleric. I mean, your clerics are using all their mana all the time, more than any other core, so it is a lot of runes saved. But usually when I think about saving spell rolls, rune costs, I'm thinking more offensively. I'm thinking about meteor showers and nightmares, tornadoes, those more expensive spells. As a cleric, you're casting a lot more, great protection. It's not that. However, the duration. Dark Elf's the only cleric pick that's saving mana. There's no plus mana race, but the spell duration means you're casting presumably 25% less fort spells, at least on those ones that you have as like permanent upkeep. Pretty much always have Illuminate Shadows on sticks and your best core. Always have greater protection up on people. So you are saving mana with that. I think that's pretty important. However, I feel like you kind of lose some of the value out of Dark Elf if you're going a cleric, because you're not going to be using offensive spells as much. You're not getting nearly as much use out of Chastity, Mage's Wordlaw. Even Mage's Fury isn't like WPA is nice for a cleric to succeed more, but if you're running sort of a tankier cleric, maybe you don't want Mage's Fury up because they're just going to fireball you. On that way, it's not great. Birth rate's not great on a cleric. Clerics, you usually, at least in my opinion, you want them to grow a bit more. You don't want them being chained. So they have that birth rate built in as a penalty. It's not ideal for the place you want your clerics. But I do like defense on. So you're going to be able to run a Dark Elf cleric that you don't need to pump elites on. Your converts are going to be mostly enough. You're going to have a lot of time in End of War Ceasefire just to pump wizards and science. And then say you have like 6 to 8 EPA, got some forts, your clerics who got minus losses. People probably aren't chaining you first either. So once you make a couple hits and your defense goes even higher, you get to a spot where you're essentially unchainable. And while you're in that spot, you're relying on your higher science and higher wizards to be very tanky. I think in that way, Dark Elf is going to be a pretty successful cleric, but that O-spec convert, you're going to lose a lot of offense pretty quickly. So that would be my main concern of a Dark Elf cleric, is that you're just not getting that offensive value out of them that you want. You're going to want to start with a lot of O-specs. And the best way to maintain that offense is to do more massacres and raises, if possible. So what you can do as a Dark Elf cleric would be to make maybe one good trad, like your first sort of chain of the war. You're making big hits and getting converts. And then for the rest of the war, assuming you're in a spot where you can't be chained that easily, like it would take a significant investment due to your defense, you start moving into raising core, massing weaker TMs and hybrids if you can. And maybe they do chain you by doing that, but you're a province that didn't have very high offense to begin with, and they're going to have to invest a lot to take you down. That's just going to give you more time for your TMs and core to do damage to them. So I think that's a decent spot, but not my favorite. I'd say Dark Elf, sort of like a B- cleric, maybe even a C+. Can fill some roles well, but it's not my favorite. I think what the Dark Elf does, we'll see the Elf do better. I'll get to that when we get there, I guess. No extra good cleric spell. And Dwarf. So, Dwarf fits that tanky category a bit, and you're combining that economic science with a build efficiency bonus, and if you're being a larger province, which I expect or hope out of my clerics, then that construction and raise cost bonus is more valuable as well. I don't really like having that TPA nerf on a cleric. Don't want to be too vulnerable to Night Strike runs. As a cleric, I'm more worried about Night Strikes and chains. But in other ways, Dwarf's the best against Night Strikes because of that build efficiency. So Dwarf has access to Mist, which I think is going to be super strong. I think if you've got a few clerics, you're going to want one Dwarf. So go. Dwarf's got a good elite. They've got pretty solid offense. Don't want too many stables as Dwarf because it cuts into that build efficiency bonus. So if you're running more of like a 1-to-1 elite to D-spec tanky build, then you don't have to run as many stables to mount all your elites, and you still got a pretty strong province. And sort of similar to the Avian with the build efficiency bonus, you can really pick what things you want a lot of and how strong they are. So I think a Dwarf Cleric's definitely on par with I'd give it a B+. Maybe an A- for Cleric. Just because that is going to be so good. I don't think you're going to want to run Dwarf Clerics as a main core for similar reasons as I've stated in other races. Just want to have more offense or more speed or more oomph hitting power for a main core. So with your clerics, you sort of want to get something out of them on top of just being a support caster. So either you want to leverage that economy or something else. Elf. I really like the idea of elf clerics. First land crown I won, I felt was really on the back of a couple very strong elf clerics. Actually, maybe that's the age of my land crown, because my land crown was on no. But the age after, we had some elf clerics. The age before, I think we had elf clerics. I love elf clerics. You can do a lot with them. they have that 12 defense, sort of like the Dark Elf Cleric, but you don't have that issue of converting your offense away. So you're able to run like an 8 to 10 D-spec per acre Elf Cleric with some forts that especially if it's a larger province, very quickly gets to the point of being effectively unchainable. Because you can only hit them one time with the enemy core, and unless you're going to have your entire core hit the cleric one time each to chain them, they're not going to go that deep, and that's a really big investment compared to being like 3 or 4 time hit, whatever orcs and undead they might have, sort of thing. On top of that, they've got Ghost Workers, which is a nice economic spell. It's no longer a support spell, but for the province itself, you're adding free building efficiency. They've got Wages. Again, if you want a larger tanky province, there has more military units, they're going to be paying more wages than the rest of your core on average. They're going to be bait for fireballs, they're going to be bait for greed. So having that wages built in is really effective. And then rune production is going to be huge. You're an economic province, you're a large province. You could have a couple of your elf clerics making probably half your kingdom's runes in a war if you play them right. So I think elf cleric's my favorite cleric for the style of cleric I like to run. You run something like 10 EPA, 10 D-specs per acre, even a couple homes in there to like keep the birth rate up and a little bit more build space. You're a really good dragon slaying province. You can sack a lot of those D-specs in there. And it's not like if you send half your defense as a big elf cleric to a dragon, it's not like you suddenly become a top chain target anyways, because you didn't necessarily start with all that much offense either. And they've probably been fireballing you, so you're already under pop. So when you slay a lot of a dragon, don't really lose that much. So I really like that aspect of elf clerics too. I'd say elf is an A cleric for sure. Only thing it's missing is any sort of extra spells, and some worse off elf clerics might be casting Mystic Aura. Don't cast Mystic Aura. It's not worth your time. Your mana's too good elsewhere to be casting Mystic Aura. And you got a pretty tanky elite. You can sit a few elites home if you want sometimes. I don't know. Fairy. Well, I'm not sure how I would run a fairy cleric. The WPA buff is sort of a whiff, because it's so much better of a bonus offensively than it is for support casting. Really don't need that much WPA to be a support caster. It helps, it does save you some mana, but it's just not a huge deal. Now, the reason it would help here is it keeps you from getting fireballed, and that's really nice. It helps you keep more honor. Clerics are usually honor sinks, so it's really good defense. And I'd say it's more valuable as a defensive thing as a offensive or support casting benefit. -1 spell. I think that's nice as well, because you do have a lot of good spells as a cleric, but casting 3 mana support spell or self spells is kind of a drag. So this helps you use your cleric mana a bit better. If you want like that 1 token fairy for Fool's Gold, and have that be a cleric, I guess. Might be hard to break TMs, but you only need to land it once or twice to really piss someone off. So, and you do need a Pitfall caster. Now, I don't really want to mix offensive spells with support spells. So if I want a token Pitfall caster, I don't know it's going to be Fairy Cleric. So, maybe it can just help pad out the stats a bit there and how many people can support Pitfalls, but you got Invis. It sort of helps you. You're in that position where you've got a bit more wizards, a bit more thieves than most other provinces. You've got a bit of honor because you're just not getting hit that much. You can start to make use of the WPA and Invis a lot more. Likewise, you're looking at a very tanky province. But you're not going to field a lot of offense. So you got to figure out how to make that work. You could potentially go for like a pure defense fairy cleric if you wanted, with decent TPA. You're not going to be as strong as a rogue, but you can get yourself into a position where you're night striking almost effectively rogue, mystic, or a heretic, and you're using your mana efficiently, forecaster. I think I'd still probably want to fit in this, though. Overall, I don't think your cleric's going to be a fairy. You're losing offense too quick. Just having sort of a weird ball of defense that can't really do anything else isn't my jam. I'd say fairy cleric's probably a C minus. Not my favorite. With that population nerf, you can't do it all. So I do like the self spell. You're going to be a really hard to deal with province. The problem is you're just not going to be a threat. So people aren't really going to care about you. So all you're really doing is maybe holding on to peasants. If you're drafting a bunch and making gold, it's nice, but if your goal's a province that can draft a lot and make gold, why not just be a fairy mystic? Your mana to hurt people. Halfling. So Halfling's odd because I think Town Watch is the best support spell on the list. So I think just running a Halfling Cleric's gonna be ideal. Question is, how do you run it? I think in a lot of ways you can just be like, well, let's sort of run it just as like a suicide attacker, get as much out of it as I can, as I don't, you know, if you're trying to run it like the elf, it's just not as powerful. So, if you can't run a sort of tanky province the way you want it, you may as well try to pretend to be a core as best you can. So I could see just running like 5D specs per acre and like 15 O specs per acre and whatever elites you can afford. And you just smash into people and you pretend that you just pretend to be an orc, but you're not an orc, but you're kind of close to an orc. I think that's how I'd see most of them being played. Alternatively, you could look at running like 10D specs per acre with like 5 or 6 TPA, a few Thieves' Dens, and like 10 O specs per acre. And you're probably just making one fair hit a wave to help out with chains and gain some land. And you're actually going to be putting out some pretty effective night strikes. You're going to be better at night striking than the fairy. You're going to have more population for that sort of stuff. And you're going to have defense enough. You're not easy to chain or mass. And you don't have enough power that people want to chain or mass you. So you can get away with doing a bit more damage while you're fulfilling that support role. So I'd say there's 2 pretty decent ways to play the Halfling Cleric. Neither are out of this world, but I think both do pretty well. And just because that Town Watch is so strong, I'm going to say Halfling's probably a Cleric in any situation where you want to use Town Watch. And maybe a B- Cleric. Human Cleric. Now, this is more interesting. You get that Salvation as a bonus spell, which I do think is pretty strong. However, higher self-spell mana cost means you're mostly not going to be benefiting from your own spell. In War, I don't think a human casts any self-spells if they're a Cleric. I think they could get another Cleric to cast spells for them. I don't think they're casting any spells on their own in War. They're not keeping up fountain of knowledge. They're not doing nothing. Human military is very strong. So you can absolutely run a pure core human cleric and just rely on the power of their offense. They're going to be, just as strong as that avian cleric that's going a pure core sort of build. I think you can also run that sort of tankier style of cleric where you have 8 to 10 d-specs per acre and some forts. Because you've got that economy bonus, and then you can tie that together with income in a very similar way to the elf, where it's got minus wages and runes. This one, it's just income. You're going to be aiding a lot of gold people to pay their wages. You're going to be funding dragons. If they fireball you, you'll still be making your own wages. And then the credits in combat means if you're still just making trads, maybe you don't have the most offense in the world, you're not running a bunch of TG or any science, so you're not, say, getting a ton of base credits. That extra credits will let you sort of train defense to remain semi-unbreakable, or just keep adding offense and slowly creating more threats out of yourself. And then the credits also is build credits. So that means as you grow as a cleric, you're going to be able to maintain those sort of tanky builds that you without too much bloat. And the economic bonus of cleric will help you actually fit those elites in, even at their cost. So I think a human cleric is a very strong core, a very strong cleric. It's got a lot of different ways you can play it. So I'm looking at a strength cleric for a human. Pretty good. Pretty good. Orc. Orc cleric's a weird one. I don't know how much I like it. It's in a very odd spot because orc is gonna bloat if you just leave it to its own devices. Orc's always gonna want to be doing trads. So it's always gonna want to be growing. So it's going to be very vulnerable to night strikes, very vulnerable to fireballs. They lose more land, so they're going to be very vulnerable to being chained. I think your Orc Cleric is just running as a pure core. And if you're running as a pure core and you're likely to be chained, Orc Clerics will be, I think, then it's a bit harder to cast support spells. You're looking at, unless you're looking at losing all your guilds. Stuff like that. But Bloodlust plus Cleric is a really nice combo because you're killing 15, 25% really when you add the offense to the kills. 25% more units and you're losing 30% less. Factor that in with the plus losses. Okay, fine, you're losing 15% less or so. But I think Orc Cleric's pretty strong. I think it's maybe the strongest of like the core clerics without being the best like support caster. I just think that if you want to chain people as an orc, you're probably looking at tactician and warrior. I think the main reason to play an orc cleric is if you want a high offense cleric that can sync with your like warrior or war hero core. Or if you have, say, a bunch of orc warriors, sync up with the clerics. Throw in some orc clerics seems fine as well. The economic bonus will help you get those elites, and an orc without the elites is a bit weaker. So I'm sure you could make an argument that an orc cleric is going to have more elites. They might almost have 15% more offense from the elites than the warrior, and it kind of evens out that way. Could make the argument. You'd probably be wrong. Nerf from honor is really a big pain. a lot of clerics have the most honor of any of the core in your kingdom. You've got a lot of Baron and Lord core, and you've got these clerics that are V-counts and counts. And so Orc loses out a lot from that. Going to be chained a lot more. They're not really going to hold honor at all, and they're not going to use the honor very well. So if you're running a lot of D-specs as an Orc, you're really losing out on that elite power, plus power, those gains and stuff. And so if you're running low D-specs and you're getting chained, then the minus casualties don't really help you at all, because you're just getting your stuff overpopped. And if you're a high offense cleric and you get night striked, the minus casualties aren't helping you that much. So I think the strength of an Orc cleric mostly comes down to the strength of Orc, more than any sort of synergy there. So I'm gonna say Orc cleric C+. Not so bad, not so good. I think other clerics are doing cleric things better. But here's the thing, if you're not looking for a cleric that's just, he's a cleric, he's doing our support stuff, and then I want him to be doing whatever. If you're looking for a cleric that you can pretend is the same as the rest of your core, the Orc is doing good. I go a bit over that article I'm writing about. Sometimes you want a cleric that's as close to the rest of your core as possible. You're not losing any attacking power. And sometimes you want a cleric that's just the most efficient cleric it can be, so you don't need any of them. Sometimes you want a cleric that can really lead the strengths of cleric and benefit from it that way, but not in a traditional core or pure attacker setup. So I think Orc mostly excels in that I'm pretending I'm not a cleric, but I still have support spells. And Undead. Undead cleric is interesting. I think it's relatively weak, but some people might think it's good. Explain that a bit. So immune to the plague, kind of worthless if you're undead and cleric at the same time. No food needed. One of your strengths of a cleric with economic science is that you're going to have good production, probably making runes and food. As an undead, you're sort of losing half that bonus. You're not getting any bonus kills as a cleric to take advantage of this. Elite conversions. When you get hit, you're not getting as many animate deads, which I mean, losing less so that you don't get more soldiers. Bad thing, but it's sort of a bad thing. But the reason I think some people might think, yeah, this is good, is because, yeah, no access to hospitals. So if I want some minus casualties, it needs to be from cleric. There's no other way, unless I'm getting a bunch of resilient science or I'm running stalwart. But, you know, undead are primarily attacking with their O specs. So, what do we say? I don't really care that much about preserving O specs compared to. And when I have a D spec, I'm getting chained really hard again. Cleric bonuses aren't as good when you're getting chained. So, I'm not a big fan of Undead Cleric. I think it's probably one of the worst clerics. I think it's probably one of the worst undeads as well. I'm going to rate that a C-. No good. So, yeah, there you go. I forget what I actually rated everything overall. I think my top clerics were human, halfling, elf, and dwarf, and avian. Well, that's more than half the race, so. Oh well. Basically, I think you're avoiding dark elf. I think you're avoiding fairy. I think you're avoiding undead. I think you're only picking Orc Cleric if you just want every one of your attackers to have as much offense as possible. And you don't really need that Cleric as much. And I think the Orc might. But I think what stands out to me the most is Halfling because of Town Watch, and Elf just because of that D-spec and the runes, economy, and all of that together. Yeah. Halfling and Elf. And then Avian and Dwarf. I think that's your tier list. And that's what the Clerics are looking like for next stage. I hope to write sort of a more in-depth general Cleric article. Post that in the next couple days or whenever I get around to finishing it. It's not going to be specifically age related, but I think I will go over a few of the points here about what sort of races make the best Clerics. But it's more of an evaluation of what their bonuses mean compared to other core, and how they play compared to other core, and if you want to run a lot of them or a few of them, what that looks like. So I can give you a bit of an overview of that here. One of the main takeaways is that a casualty reduction isn't worth a lot in war because it takes a long time for it to matter. Basically, what this chart here explains is you're looking at the same starting offense for a cleric and a warrior, and how many waves it takes for their offenses to match. It takes about 7 or 8 waves for the cleric offense and the warrior offense to be even. And then it takes another 8 waves for the total amount of offense sent over every wave to match out. And that's sort of why you don't like clerics. Also, that the minus casualty bonus isn't quite as valuable as other bonuses. Doesn't stack very well with itself. So, anyways, you can look forward to that. If you want to contact me on Muga or anything, you can't right now. I've got a 7-day timeout for making my username Large Phallic Joe, aka Large Phallic Joke username, aka Biggest Dickus, aka Massive Johnson. So I'll probably see you all next stage. But if you want to reach out to me, just PM me or come join the Warbird server. We're open to anyone. And yeah, I'll make another video or two before finals are out, I think. A couple after finals. I think I'll go over a few setup options, stuff like that. So yeah, I'll see you all next time.